So the pasuk says in Parashas Chukas, "Vatama sham Miriam, vatikaver sham," and Miriam died and was buried there. There's an interesting chazal on this pasuk, an interesting medrash. We're going out from this pasuk, shekalu meisi midbar, that the people, we all know from the sin of the Meraglim, we read about last week, that instead of the Jews entering Eretz Yisrael right away, they had to travel in the Midbar for 40 years. And that's why, in fact, the Makoshesh Eitzim, the person who gathered wood and was put to death, the Medrash says, Elushem Shamayim, he had kavanah for the sake of heaven, that people thought the Torah was no longer working, so therefore you had to do something to show that the Torah is still in fact. So really they're supposed to go into Eretz Yisrael right away, but the sin of the Meraglim, they were destined for 40 years. So how do we learn out from this pasuk, like Tamasham Miriam, that Miriam died, but she covered Sham and she was buried? Then what do we see from this pasuk that the Jews in the Midbar stopped dying? It's a no-soap radio? Like, what's the connection here? So it's an interesting explanation from the Shnei Hamaoros, based on the Medrash. Based on the Medrash is an interesting Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara in Tainus tells us at the end of Tainus, when the Mishnah, the Gemara is talking about Tu B'Av. The Gemara is talking about the two happiest days of the year, Yom Kippur and the 15th of Av. So the Gemara says, I understand Yom Kippur, we're forgiven for our sins. But Tu B'Av, no one even heard of it, forget about it, it's the happiest day of the year. So the Gemara lists the many things that happened on that day. And what is one of those many things? That the Jews in the Midbar stopped dying. And the Gemara tells us that what happened, for the first 40 years when they traveled in the desert. So how did it work? That before they used to go to sleep at night, everyone dug their own grave, so to speak, and they went to sleep in the grave. Well, if you didn't wake up, someone else finished the job, you couldn't do it anymore. And then you did that for 40 years. And someone always died all the time. Then I guess it was towards the end of the 40 years, apparently. They did it. It was I was Tisha B'Av or around there, and no one died. So they figured we got the dates wrong. Maybe it's after they did it until Tu B'Av, when the moon, in the middle of the month, and then they realized that's it. Everyone who was dying was going to die, and that's it. So the Shnei Hamaoros is a very important, a very interesting pshat. He says, so how do we know? Because how did it work? They used to do the burial first, and then they used to die. Not the real burial, but they used to dig the grave. So that's what he says here. Vatama sham Miriam died. Then vatikaver sham, and she was buried there. We see first she died, then she was buried. Apparently then they were no longer digging graves every morning in terms of that, because she was already dead. And that's what they point out, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, regarding the mitzvah of kfura, regarding the mitzvah of burial, that the Gemara has a discussion, minayin l'kfura min Torah, from how do I know the mitzvah is burial is biblical, or the other day in the Gemara is remez l'kfura, where's the hint to kfura? So the commentators point out these are two opinions in the Gemara on whether burial is a mitzvah min Torah or a mitzvah midrabanan. If you say minayim, from where do I know? The implications are it's biblical. If you say remez, it's usually drabanan. We paskin that kfura is min Torah. We paskin the mitzvah of burial is biblical in nature. And that's what they point out. The Gemara says, what's the nature? What is the reason behind the mitzvah of kfura? So the Gemara gives different reasons. Either is it who is it for? Is it kavod achai or kavod hames? Is it honor for the living, or honor for the, who's the basic mitzvah for? Is it for the one that he should have a kapara, he should be put in the ground? Or it's kavod achai, it's not nice, the family, the body is lying around and it's smelling and it's nitan l'kvura, no one's doing anything. In fact, that's the Gemara's discussion by hesped, by eulogy as well. The Gemara wants to know, who's the eulogy for? Is it to comfort the people who are alive who come to the funeral? Or is the eulogy for the one who is nifter? So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina." What's the difference? Either way, you're going to do a eulogy, whether it's for kavod achai or kavod hamei. So the Gemara is a very big nafkamina. Number one is, can a person be mochel on his eulogy? Can a person forego his honor of having a eulogy? Of course, if he forgoes his honor, if he comes to you after he dies, I think I'd listen to him. But what about before he died? If he left it in the tzava, I don't want a eulogy. Do we accept his wishes, or we don't care? We give him a eulogy anyway, or her. So the Gemara concludes that basically eulogy is kavod hameis, and therefore a person has the right to say they don't want to have a eulogy. In fact, it's a case, I think it was one of the Pnei Yoshua, one of the great Gedolim, who left. He didn't want to have a eulogy, but one of the other Gedolim was there and he gave him a eulogy anyway. So those are special situations out kavod haTorah, if it's the leader of the generation, or it's or they talk about by Shaul, the Jewish people were punished for not eulogizing Shaul HaMelech properly. So they say in that case it's not a proof either, because when you're talking about kavod hamalchus, kavod hamelech, that's a different scenario. But generally speaking, we assume you can be mochel on a eulogy. However, as the Rambam writes, however, when it comes to kfura, we assume not that way. That kfura person is not only apparently kavod hameis, but it's kavod achai. And if someone says, "I don't want to be buried," we don't listen to them. It's not an uncommon. Usually, people don't say they don't want to be buried. They say they want to be cremated, or they want to say something else. So we assume cremation is not burial, as Rav Chaim Ozer Grzinski points out, because Shemabato mitzvah aseh of kfura, that even if you take the ashes and put them in the ground, that's not you anymore. And then also it's a denial of the next world. So the bottom line is we assume cremation is not considered burial. So therefore, if one leaves that they want to be cremated, then the one does not listen to them, because it's like asking one who isn't going to be buried at all. So that's what we see from here. That first Miriam died and then she was buried. So we see that it was different than how it normally went in the Midbar, where they first dug their own graves and then were buried.